All right, we're going to try some electronic resources for editing papers, mostly things that are suggesting spelling and grammar. So I have for today a sample paper that I borrowed from a previous class I taught. So this is a student written paper, and really there's always something to improve about a paper, so I don't want to be too critical about this one. Um, but we're going to kind of see what the software is suggesting and just kind of talk through that process. So started us off, we're in Microsoft Word. This is the desktop client, but you can also use Microsoft Word as part of the online Microsoft Office suite that you have access to through Whitewater. And already up front, you can see probably, hopefully something you're familiar with. The squiggly red underline, this is a spelling, basically a spelling error as the program sees it. And if you notice what's been highlighted, this is a scientific name for a genus and a scientific name for a specific epithet or a species name here, this binomial. Over here, we've got some red squiggles under the names of some authors. So these programs are doing their best to figure out what's a real word and what is a mistake. And at least, they're going to call your attention to something that might be worth fixing or might not need to be fixed. So one option, depending on how deep you want to go into these kinds of programs, you can train your computer program to recognize words. So I'm on a Mac and it's a control click, or if you're on PC, that's a right click. There we go. Um, I can use this option to ignore or add to my dictionary. So this is up to you if you want to start a dictionary of words you're going to use that include people's names or scientific names. What it does for your paper is it fixes that throughout. One thing you might want to watch out for is that you can have a spelling mistake in a scientific name. So the computer doesn't know a correct or an incorrect scientific name. They're going to look pretty similar. So if you train it on the correct scientific name, it'll highlight you or draw your attention to misspelled versions of those. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just so we can kind of work through this and make things look a little tidier. Maybe I'll ignore it for these author names here. I've got a different kind of squiggle here. This is a kind of a blue dotted line for a different kind of error. This is a grammar suggestion. So this is the phrase in order for, and I'm going to right click on that one. And it says work on that for conciseness. So instead, how about for instead of in order for? There's some personal preference in here. I would say it's good to be critical of these kinds of suggestions. So don't just go through and take every suggestion. Certainly the prevailing thought is that your writing should be concise and tight where it can be, but sometimes there's really some value in that extra language. So I'm not going to say that every one of these is the most important thing to fix. But for this exercise, I want you to consider and kind of evaluate how effective these comments are going to be. We've got a couple instances of come into contact with. We'll see what it suggests. Just a single word replacement, meet, encounter, so on. A couple cases of that. You might choose, in this instance, you've got the same phrase in two consecutive sentences. That's probably worth fixing. It's also coming up down here. So this author has used that phrase a lot. You might get away with one, but I'd say too many, it's going to start standing out. Here's one. I'm actually kind of impressed. It is recognizing that this word that has a Greek origin, mycorrhizae, referring to soil fungi, I think it's recognizing that that's a plural word and should be using a plural verb instead of this singular verb. So in fact, I'm impressed. I didn't know mycorrhizae had made it into the Microsoft Word dictionary. So there's actually not a lot to work with here as far as suggestions, and I want to then maybe swing over to our other platform we'll look at here is Grammarly. This is one that I believe Whitewater has recently added to their repertoire. Should be something that students have access to, so I started us out that we aren't logged in. Should be able to log in with your credentials. And I believe this is free for students. All of these things, as we move forward and software becomes more accessible and more capable, I think it's totally worthwhile to use this kind of assistance in your writing. So it's not like you have to do things the difficult way just because that's the harder way, or takes longer or something like that. By all means, do it the faster way, as long as you're not straight up cheating and having someone else write things for you. Use your resources that you have. So let's try this one out. And okay, so it had my Whitewater address. It's actually remembering me on here, so it's going to pull me right on through with the Whitewater credentials. And here we are. This is the main page. You can see I've got a couple of documents here already. I'm going to upload that same document we were just working on. And Eastern Prairie Fringed Orchid. Grammarly makes their money on trying to improve your writing. And so I would say they're probably going to have more suggestions than we saw in the Microsoft Word, which is really more for just making sure you're understood. The Grammarly suggestions are going to be more toward just really improving the difference between it, like communicating effectively and really impressing somebody with your writing. Okay, so I haven't used Grammarly a whole lot, but it does have a lot of capabilities, as we'll see. It's asking us what kind of document we're writing. So some things we'll cover in the course. Is your audience a general audience or an expert audience? So I think it's hit the nose on here. It's estimating these as well. Lots of artificial intelligence behind the scenes. So knowledgeable audience, somewhere in between having never heard of orchids before, and expert might be somebody who is actually studying orchids for a science career. Neutral formality, informal versus formal. I think that's probably fair. Academic, we're not quite academic or business, so general's probably good. Intent, I'd say it might be helpful to fill in one of these. I'd say we're probably at the inform. Maybe describe. So this was a student project. The goal was to research a topic and explain it, basically. So I think inform is probably a good way to describe this one. All right, close that up. And we see there's a lot of different underlines of different colors. And maybe we'll work through some of these. You'll have a document that you can use. The point of this exercise is not for you to fix up the writing that I'm going to give you as a sample. The point is that you get a little familiarity with the platforms of Microsoft Word and Grammarly. You could also do this in a Google Drive context. So take your time to kind of feel out the program and see what is valuable for you. So we'll see some other familiar comments here. Lukofia says, if this is a word you don't want to have a problem with, here's a little clicky, add to the dictionary. So that'll fix all of those. Eastern Prairie is a federally threatened orchid. Redundant noun. I don't know what they want us to remove there. Is federally threatened. All right. So it says we're repeating the word orchid here. So Eastern Prairie Fringed Orchid. This is this whole thing in capitals is the capitalized ones. That's the kind of the official government name for this species. So you really have to use that whole name, Eastern Prairie Fringed Orchid. So just a general good suggestion here, a federally threatened orchid, you could say plant. You could do as they recommend here, is federally threatened. And we trimmed it up a little bit. Once it first started to become threatened, it was due to the loss of the habitat it prefers. I'd say this even could be fixed up a little bit. It's a little clunky, the loss of habitat that it prefers, loss of its preferred habitat or something like that. So that hasn't been suggested. You can use that as part of your criteria for deciding if Grammarly is a good platform for you. That word change, let's say, appears to be written in the passive voice. This is another one of these. I don't side really on one side or the other of active or passive voice. There's certainly a lot of benefit to using the passive voice. It's thought of as not as forceful or persuasive to be writing in the passive voice, but it's also a very common way to write scientifically. So this is one where the communication, the information you're conveying really doesn't change if you're active voice or passive voice. It's really how people feel about the effectiveness of the writing. What I would recommend is not to bounce between active voice and passive voice. That gets a little confusing. It starts, as the words say, active voice, passive voice, it starts feeling like you're having a conversation with multiple people if you're active and passive back and forth. Um, so it doesn't give us a direct suggestion. Consider writing in the active voice. You'd have to restructure a lot of the sentence for that. Farmers' needs, farmers' needs. Okay, so I've suggested a comma here. That's a good place to put a comma. Due to the loss of change for farmers' needs, there's a little tricky possessive of the plural. I think that's fair. Um, as it's written, this is for farmer, as in one farmer, and doesn't have an article like for a farmer or for the farmer. And the author is pretty clearly intending for lots of farmers or the needs of many farmers. So that looks like a good suggestion there. Let me do just a couple more of these. I don't want to drag this out too long. Once it first became threatened, um, yeah, so kind of redundant. First started, you could leave. Sometimes you just want to play with your language and say, you could take that word out entirely and you really haven't changed much about the information. So first started to become threatened or just started. Obviously, starting is a thing you do first. So we can take that. Good suggestion. Threatened. Um, maybe suggesting, so engagement synonym, we've got threatened here, and this is threatened. In the event that you needed to use this as like a regulation category, you might have to stick with that. Here's one that Grammarly probably doesn't really consider, is that the categories of threatened and endangered, these are regulated categories in the government. So this might be something that you really have to push back on the program to say, no, that's not actually the right way to change it. So just as I'm talking through this, notice that we've kind of got our head up and we're thinking critically about whether these are valid suggestions. Obviously, you want to maybe stick with your own writing if you feel like someone is suggesting something you don't appreciate or agree with. That's your prerogative, and just want to point you to this as a resource. Overall, you notice I changed most of the things that were being suggested. I accepted those suggestions. So the assignment is to try out this program and evaluate how the changes are kind of sitting with you. And I guess as you move on through your life, you can decide if this is a resource you want to keep using in your writing or not. All right, thanks.